Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Grandstand Gurus, the number one sports podcast on the Explosion Network. I'm your host. My name is Jack Kruse. I'm joined this week again by Jono Peck.
What's going on, guys?
And making his debut on Grandstand Gurus, the Tasmanian tyrant, Dylan Blight.
Tyrants, ball.
Dylan, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here. I can officially be on every show in the network.
Absolutely.
It's good.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't know, Dylan is not really a sports guru as such. He's more of our techie, gamey sort of guru on the other side of the network. As you know, we do a myriad of shows. But we're going to mix it up a little bit this week, and we're going to talk a little bit about Dylan's hometown and a few different things. So, yeah, we're just gonna this is just how we do it at Explosion Network. We just throw caution to the wind and we just go for it. So please
we do what we want.
Bear with us. But no, it's going to be a great episode. I'm looking forward to it. Let's kick it off with how we always do. Jono, what was your highlight from the weekend sport?
My highlight would be probably the NBA draft. I mentioned last week that I was looking forward to it, and it happened last week. It was kind of a highlight and a low light. There was a lot happening, but my team traded away its best player. They definitely lost the trade, and they're setting themselves up for possibly a season where they're one of the worst sides in the competition. So it's going to be an interesting...
Is it one of those short-term pain, long-term game things, or was it just one of the...
Yeah,
just a bad move overall? Is it going to benefit you in the long run, do you think, or was
that's the thought? Call? Like in the NBA, if you're not up the top, you may as well be at the bottom, because if you're at the bottom, then you've got a chance of getting a high draft pick, and that can mean the difference between success and just middling failure or underachievement. So trading away Jimmy Butler, they got some draft picks, they got some young talent that could become something, but I think it's going to be I don't know if they'll be tanking necessarily, but they definitely won't be competing, in my opinion.
So just
but
for
the draft was... sorry.
Just for our listeners who don't know, just give us a bit of a background on the actual trade itself. What happened? Who went where?
Yeah, so Jimmy Butler, who's the franchise player from the Bulls, went to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Zach LaVine for their number 4 or 5 draft pick last year, whose name escapes me in this very minute. I'm going to lose another one of my NBA cards for forgetting that. Chris Dunn, I think that's it. And they got the number 7 pick in this year's draft, which turned out to be a European stretch 4, which means it's a tall player that can shoot long distance. So basically a bit of an unknown quantity in terms of what they were getting back, because it's such a young thing. But yeah, the draft itself it's always very entertaining. LeVar Ball speaking about Lorenzo was hilarious, guaranteeing that his son would take the Lakers to the playoffs this next season, which is always...
He's a character, isn't he?
If that was my dad, if that was my dad talking about me that way, I'd kind of be like, maybe don't promise this rabid fan base that I'm going to do something before I've even played a game. But I saw they turned up on Monday Night Raw today, which is another perplexing move for them. But
that was almost going to be my
characters.
That was almost going to be my highlight. That was brilliant. He's a character. I've gone from sort of being like, what is this guy? He's just off his rocker, to I'm like falling in love with this man. He's a classic. I think sport needs personalities like that. So there's too many, especially in this day and age. There's too much. Too many vanilla, too many cliches. It's all, 1 week at a time, and we don't look too far ahead, and week in, week out, and all the standard sports cliches. So it's good to get a bit of a character in world sport, and he's clearly doing that. Did they end up getting their shoe deal or a shoe deal?
Not with Nike. I don't really know what happened with that. I think they're pushing the we are our own brand thing.
Yeah, did that?
Can I jump in for a side question?
Sure.
Yeah, go, Dylan.
Nike, Americans say, I hear people say Nike.
Yeah, I think
Australians say
tomato.
Nike, but it's Nike.
Yeah,
I say Nike.
it's
We
Nike.
also
Yeah, I always say Nike. I always say Nike too.
Mm.
Sometimes, if you watch I've said it a couple times in like my vlogs, and I've purposely said Nike, and then in another video I've said Nike to see if anyone would pick up, because I'm like, why do Americans say it completely different? And I always thought it must have been. I was like, are we wrong? Are they wrong? I mean, some dude, some basketball commentators like, oh, he's sponsored by Nike. I'm like, maybe he's right.
we also say Adidas here, which it's clearly Adidas.
Adidas,
over in the
yeah.
States.
Adidas,
Yeah.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
We just roll our own way.
Just Australian slang side talk. Anyway, back to it.
No, that's very good. Dylan, have you got a highlight for us this week?
No,
Perfect.
I've watched literally nothing the last week.
No,
I mean,
it's fine. I didn't.
it's hard to catch. I think the only thing I would have wanted to watch, I can tell you what I would have wanted to watch.
Sure.
I didn't get to watch it. There was the big North America League of Legends thing on this last week.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't got a chance to watch it. Immunity won it. For anyone that's listening that pays attention to stuff like
Is
that.
that
But Team Liquids? No, he would be talking about Dota. Freaking Dota.
Nerds.
Yeah, it's talk. We'll get to that.
See,
we will
when
get to
Dylan
that.
talks about esports, that's how he feels when we talk about normal sports.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a beautiful thing.
No, I don't look down on yous though. I'm just like, I don't care.
Oh, very good. My highlight, it's pretty, probably pretty predictable for our listeners out there. What my highlight was the
Bulldogs won.
The Bulldogs won. We beat North Melbourne by a point. It pretty much played out exactly how I sort of predicted it would over last week's episode. From the selection table all the way through to the game, in that the only changes they made were injured players going out and coming in, so they stuck with the same team, and it paid off. They were and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent on this one, guys, so just indulge me for a little bit. So, we obviously went to the game. I went to the game, and the doggies went into the game and played really well for about 3 quarters. In the first half, at one point, I think it was 15 free kicks to 2 in our favour. So we got a pretty good run from the umpires. And then I think at halftime it was like 16-4 or something like that. So it hadn't really evened up at much. And then in the second half, the free kick count was even. And I actually made a comment at halftime. I said, which happens in every single game in that aspect. I said the umpires will try and even it up now in the second half, because they'll see the free kick count and they'll go, well, we need to even it up, because they know they're going to get in trouble, or they're going to get shtick in the media, which they do, and they have. So they try and even up the free kick contest. And the umpiring in the first half, I thought was they probably went overboard. Just on a few 50-50 ones went our way, which majority of the free kicks were there, because doggies generally harder at it, first to the ball, head over the ball, and North Melbourne was sloppy. And North Melbourne got the rub of the green definitely in the second half with some 50-50 calls. So... But what sort of annoys me is the people that come out and complain about the umpires after games, and specifically about specific instances. And there was a point at just before halftime in the game. Sean Higgins, former Bulldog, playing now for North Melbourne, takes a mark, and now in the AFL you have 30 seconds to take your shot. So it used to be you could take as long as you wanted, you just go back, players would take way too long, they'd waste the clock. And so they put in a rule to say you have 30 seconds to have your shot on goal, or then it's play on. The player, Sean Higgins, he went back, he took his kick, he took too long. He actually took 38 seconds. The umpires called play on. And he got tackled from behind by our player, turned the ball over. They missed a shot on goal. Anyway, we ended up winning by a point. So that very well could have been the difference in the game. You never know what's going to happen, sliding doors and that kind of thing. But the thing that they're complaining about is because in the final 2 minutes of each quarter, they take the shot clock off. So during the game, they have a shot clock when someone's having a shot for goal. It shows up on the scoreboard. You have 30 seconds. It counts down so the players know when they need to start their sort of run up to have a shot. In the final 2 minutes of games or in quarters, they take the shot clock off to stop players trying to waste the clock. They just sort of hurry them up. North Melbourne are complaining that he didn't hear the umpire call play on. There was no shot clock. There needed to be a shot clock. So I'm just going to say this to North Melbourne fans. Your club is the reason there's no shot clock in the last 2 minutes, because last year when Mason Wood wasted time at the end of a game and let the clock run down just standing there looking at the scoreboard, that is the reason there's no shot clock. That is the reason Sean Higgins got tackled. He took 38 seconds. He took too long. Stick it up, yeah. All right. That's all I have to say about that. I'm sick of this.
That's your...
Sick of this.
Is that your topic for the week?
And I'm sick of these flogs like Damien Barrett coming out and trying to start media furor about apparently clubs are complaining about the Bulldogs getting free kick counts. Mate, we're hard at the ball. We're first to the ball. We stick our head over it. And it's not our fault that your crap team is too sloppy to not give away free kicks. So that's all I have to say about that. Damien Barrett is a flog.
You said that you made a comment at halftime. Who did you actually say that to?
I said it was a social media comment, so I made it on the Bulldogs forum. Yep, and people were like, oh no, they won't do that. That they blah blah blah. The umpiring is fine, and of course, because I made the comment, I said we got a pretty good run that half. Obviously, the free kick count was in our favour. I hope the umpires don't try and even it up in the second half, which they did, and everyone was sort of like, yeah, you called it in the second half.
So do you tweet during footy games?
I don't sometimes I do, normally not when it's a Bulldogs game, but I'll engage in like football forums and stuff like that during a game between the quarters and stuff like that. Can't really comment unless I'm at home watching on TV. It's easier to sort of get your phone out and do that kind of stuff, but not when I'm at the game. I'm generally too far involved, but I'll sort of get involved in the forums at sort of quarter time, half time, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, that was just a little tangent I need to get off my chest because I'm getting frustrated at the moment with all this crap. All right, into it.
All good.
So, we're going to keep on the AFL train for the first topic of the week. The reason that we have Dylan Blight with us this week, there's been a bit of talk lately, a little bit about our Apple Isle down the bottom of Australia, the state known as Tasmania. There's a lot of talk at the moment about Tasmania getting their own AFL team, which, in my opinion, they should have had a long time ago. But they haven't. The AFL's looked to expand to different markets. There's teams in Queensland, there's teams in New South Wales, we've got 2 Adelaide teams, 2 Perth teams. Other than the Northern Territory, Tasmania is the only other area and state or territory in Australia that doesn't have its own team. So I just want to have a little chat about sort of the talk at the moment and get your guys' thoughts, or yours specifically, Dylan, about whether you think that Tasmania should or could sustain an AFL team going down there. So there's been a lot of talk. Really started with Craig Hutchison on Footy Classified a couple of weeks ago. It was just a television show about AFL. He came out with sort of the grand plan for Tasmania to have their own football team, which was to relocate North Melbourne to Tasmania. Currently, North Melbourne have as do Hawthorn, they have a 5-year deal with the Tasmanian government to play 3 home games down in North Melbourne play in Launceston, Hawthorn will play in Hobart, I believe. So they've got a deal at the moment with the Tasmanian government, those teams, to play games down there. So Hutchison's idea was that they relocate to Tasmania. They play half their home games, or I think 3/4 of their home games in Tasmania, a quarter of them in Melbourne, and then the other ones are interstate travel, obviously, playing Sydney, Perth, Queensland, that kind of thing. And that sort of got legs, and there's a bit of talk around perhaps that was a theory that was put to Craig Hutchison by the AFL to put out there, because I believe it was Simon Leatherland came out and said that and this is the thing, the AFL have always been very anti putting a team down in Tasmania. So he actually came out and said, for the first time ever, actually said it could be a possibility. He said anything's possible. So there's a bit of scuttlebutt that perhaps this was an idea the AFL's come up with, and they've put it to Hutchison to sort of put out there.
Jack, why hasn't it happened yet?
Why hasn't it happened? A lot of people don't believe... Well, they don't believe the market's there. So the AFL don't believe that they can make money from a team in Tasmania. And they're probably not wrong. the AFL sees more of an opportunity for growth for the game by trying to expand the market into Western Sydney, into Southern Queensland, to try and get rugby. They want to get rugby people following AFL, right? That's why they sort of put those expansion clubs into Gold Coast and North Melbourne. In Western Sydney. And they've never put a Tasmanian team down there because there's a myriad of reasons. But one, they don't think it's sustainable. They don't think that there's enough growth opportunity for revenue. There's always the issue between the north and the south, and that, is it Hobart, is it Launceston, who gets a team? There's always been a divide between. They used to have a VFL team, but it was too hard for because half were coming from Launceston, half were coming from. I can see you're riveted by this at the moment, Dylan. Half were coming from Launceston, half were coming from Hobart, and it was just sort of too hard. So there's a lot of reasons. Participation's down in Tasmania. There was not one in the draft last year. There was not one kid that came from Tasmania, so which is seen as an issue. But the AFL seems to be getting a little bit more keen on the idea at the moment. North Melbourne are actually going to have a women's team out of Tasmania next year, which is really exciting. Brisbane's women's team are going to play a game down there. Obviously, Hawthorn and North Melbourne have got their deals to play games in Tasmania up until 2021. So, and the AFL's always wanted to get a team out of Victoria. They tried to do it with the Doggies. They've tried to do it with North and that in the past. They did it with Fitzroy back in the day. So, after all that lead in, I wanted to throw it to you, Dylan, and just ask you, from what you, as a local, as a Launceston boy, you've lived in Tasmania your entire life. Do you think that there's a real want in the community for something like this? Do you think there's a need for it? Do you think it's something that's sustainable? Is there like a thirst for football as far as you can tell? I know you're not a sports guy, but knowing people in the area, having family and friends and that kind of stuff, being a local, do you think there's a real thirst for it in Tassie to have their own AFL team?
It's got the finger on the pulse.
Whenever this topic's come up in the past, and I've overheard my family discuss it, everyone in my family has been 100% for it because I don't know why. I remember this being a big topic a few years ago for some reason. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a hot topic a couple of years ago for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, that was probably when the expansion clubs came into the competition.
That might have been it, yeah. Because I remember there was one family dinner, my pop, brother, dad, everyone, there was always saying it was the stupidest thing ever that we didn't get one. And growing up here, everyone down here, as far as I can see, everyone loves football as much as anything else. Anytime there's a match on here, town is busy as all hell. Working at a petrol station, I can tell you that whenever there's a football game on, it is busy. And it dies off very quick as soon as that game starts. And if you drive past that place when a game's just finishing, you will take forever to get past there. It is packed. So they more or less fill that. They fill our stadium out every time there's a match on. So if the question is it popular enough? As far as I can tell, it is. Any guy, and this is I don't know, every person I've ever worked with has been into football and goes and takes it very serious. Most of the people I know go to most of the matches whenever they can. A lot of people down here, though, of course, do the whole. They have to fly up to Melbourne or wherever, every once a month. Especially the more serious football fans that I've known over my life, they'll have to commit to at least flying out of state once a month or every second month or whatever it is to go support the team they follow. And that's the interesting part, of course, growing up here is that I'm sure depending on where you live, different states up on the mainland, that the people you kind of migrate towards following the team where you grow up. Whereas I think down here it's not, because we don't have an actual team. The varying different supporters is probably more like a bigger thing, because no one has like the one homegrown team that they need to they feel the urge to that they need to barrack for or something like that. So
they don't have
do I think we should get one? Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's a market for it? Yes. And I know from like reading local paper and stuff like that the like local mayors and all the pollies down here and stuff like that are 100% for it, and they've always talked up the amount of money they could make off it themselves. So
yeah, that's sort of the big one, is the financial viability of it. As far as where, do you think Hobart or do you think Launceston? Where does the team live, or is it just Tasmania and they play both?
I think I'd play bias and I'd say we should get it, but if I was being realistic, I'd say if it was ever going to happen, Hobart would get it because they are the capital. And I suppose that kind of does make sense because most people up there, a lot of people obviously don't know Launceston. They think Tassie, they at least know the name Hobart because that's the capital. So to give them the team would make sense, even if I would be biased and say just give it to Launceston.
Yeah.
Because Hobart always gets, if anything cool's going to happen to Tassie, give it to freaking Hobart. Gotta give it to them.
Yeah.
What's the stadium conditions like down there, Jack or Dylan? Do you know, like, is it up to scratch with what the AFL would consider like the standard? And
well, they play.
would that be a barrier?
Yeah, absolutely. They play home game, like, North Melbourne and Hawthorn play home games in Hobart and Launceston. So it's definitely
Is it like
it's definitely
is it a
AFL
5,000, 10,000 seats? Like,
I think they're 10 to 15. 10 to 15 you can cram in there. So yeah. And they make good money down there for it.
I don't have, like, obviously I haven't been to a bunch of stadiums to like gather the information, but as far as I've seen the last time I was there, great condition. There's nothing wrong with it. They keep it. I've been to, like, when I visited, I don't know if it was the one of the ones in Melbourne or like one. Anyway, I remember I visited one when I went on a family trip when I was younger, and I was like, this place is in way worse condition than one we've got at home, Dad. So
they've made
the groundsman here is a bit slack.
Yeah, they've definitely improved it over the years at both grounds, Hobart and Launceston. It's one of the bigger issues is sustaining a team, and one of the issues that Gold Coast and GWS and even Brisbane to an extent are facing at the moment is keeping kids. So you're going to find, so the talent pools, this is the thing, Tassie 21,000, yeah, there you go, 21,000 seats. So the issue is, and this is sort of where Tassie sort of fall into it, is that the Tassie government don't want North Melbourne to relocate. They don't want, plus they're locked in until, so nothing can happen until 2021. There's not going to be a team at least for the next 5 years because Hawthorn and North Melbourne have deals with the government to continue to play games down there. So nothing's going to happen for the next 5 years at least. But the issue is that the Tassie government, the Tassie people, they don't want a relocated team. They don't want Gold Coast to go down there. They don't want North Melbourne to go down there. They want their own team. That's sort of what they've been screaming out for years. They don't want a relocation. They want to build a team. The issues that it has is that which is the issues that we've had with the most recent expansion clubs, is it dilutes the talent pool even further. And participation is not on like a huge rise in junior football. So there's already an issue there with the talent pool not being great. So you're going to have, and then you're going to have the go home factor, is that kids are going to they're going to get drafted to Tasmania, and then they're going to want to go home to Victoria and to Adelaide and those kinds of things, which happens now enough with kids that come to Melbourne or kids that go to Queensland and go to that.
Well,
so
anyone that plays, whatever you want to call it, not proper league football down here, obviously their aim is like, they have to move. Like, there's
exactly right.
It's like, because I know my pop does like volunteer like refereeing for one of the league things down here and stuff like that.
Umpiring.
And anyone, whatever it's called. Soccer, get out of it. All the big players there, that anyone who's like actually pretty good, they have no goal within their own state, which is kind of annoying, I suppose. That they have to try and impress. It just makes it even harder to like try and, you can't impress locally and then try and get picked up locally or something like that. You have to impress further out, which is hard, I suppose.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I would love to see Tasmania get a team, only because it has a rich football history, and the Tasmanians really love their footy. And there's been some great players from come from Tasmania to play AFL footy. I mean, obviously the big one, probably the most famous one, is Matthew Richardson, and then you've got like Peter Hudson, Rodney Eade, Alistair Lynch, Gary Lyon. Like, there's some fantastic players who come from Tasmania. So
That's why I was a Richmond supporter.
probably because of Richo.
Well, my dad was,
Yeah.
and I was by part, and I reckon it would have been because of Richard.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, like that's the thing. Like, it's got a really rich and just as a sort of romantic thing, like Tasmania is kind of like the ugly step brother of Victoria. No offense.
Gee whiz.
No, they're sort of like our little brother. Like, it's always.
I knew
like,
we wouldn't get through this without insulting Tasmanians.
apologies to our Apple Isle listeners and guests. But you know, they're sort of like Victoria's little brother, and it's, you know, I'd love to see them have a team. They probably deserve one. Whether they, and the thing is, it's a more of a romantic thing that the Tasmanian sort of football personalities play on, is that it would be it's because it's a footy state that they should have one, more so than any sort of substantial business plan behind it, which is unfortunate. But I think it's something that that would be really cool. The only way I see it happening, though, because I don't think it will add a 19th team, because like I said, it'll dilute the talent pool. There'll be an extra bye. There'll be a bye every single round, which is not ideal for fixturing and whatnot.
Why don't they add two then? Why don't they add one here and then add one somewhere else?
It would
Wherever
make
you're saying, where was you saying before? Sydney or wherever?
Yeah, well,
add one there, add one here.
But that would be the issue again, is that you're diluting the talent pool even further. This is an extra 45, so that's an extra 90 people, players, junior, like, you know, drafted as well as mature age players that need to be taken out of you know, the local leagues and the junior leagues to then play senior football. We're not, like, the talent is already stretched thin with 18 teams.
Delete a team. Give us one.
Well, this is what I was sort of getting at, is I don't see them creating a 19th team. What I see happening is North Melbourne being relocated, and they'll get a substantial kickback from the AFL for that, no doubt. That's the other thing. If they created a team, it would just be an AFL-funded team, and it would be just sort of another AFL-owned team, and nobody wants that. We want teams owned by the members. So I think I can see I honestly can see North Melbourne being relocated there. I mean, there's already a lot happening behind the scenes. Like I said, their women's team is going to play down in Tassie. They already play home games down there. There's a lot of talk of them increasing their home games that they play down there at the end of the 2021 deal. So it'll be very interesting to see. I for one, hope that you get your team, Dylan, that you've wanted your whole entire life.
I have wanted my entire life. Dreamt of
A
it.
serious question, though. Do you think that if there was a Tasmanian AFL team that you would have been more inclined to follow football, or is it just something that never would, you just don't see yourself being into it?
I know we haven't really talked about much. I was into football, as most young little lads were. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if the having a home team would have helped me keep my interest, because I think, like most things, it's kind of like your parents, or like, I suppose my dad in this case, like, introduces you to something, and you get introduced to things as a young age, and then I think as you grow older, you either accept them as your own, or like realize you're not actually into the said thing. And even though, like, I was forced to play like football and I'd watch it, and, you know, like, all that sort of thing, grand final, this is great, I'd make fun of my pop, like, he used to have this Wayne Carey statue on his, like, fireplace, and I used to kick my football at it to try and knock it off and break it, and my dad would be like, say Wayne Carey sucks, and I'd be like, Pop, Wayne Carey sucks. So I have a budding AFL history, because my family's obviously really into it. But yeah, I just hit an age eventually one day where I was like, I don't actually like this at all. So
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very good. Okay, moving on. Dylan,
hello.
your topic.
I want to talk about not football. So my topic is I want to cover I was kind of brought up because nearly every couple months, whenever I read a story, and there's been a lot of stories lately about esports, because Australia has this TV show coming out. It's called Screenplay, right? It's going to have Hex and I can't remember the other dude's name. Sorry, from Good Game.
Barjo.
No, not Barjo. No,
Rude Boy. Or
can't remember his name. whatever his name, Boy, someone like that. Anyway, they're doing this show, and they was talking about doing an esports segment and all this, and of course it like upset a lot of people in Australia, and I saw heaps of people lately have been tweeting about it, and there's heaps of negative press stories about esports and stuff like that.
People are upset on the internet. So, surely not.
It's crazy. So I kind of want to cover a question about. I want to ask the question: what do you think that the word sport is kind of holding back the medium of because I'll just read you this quote, because this is the other part that helped me get to the question. There was an interview this week by a League of Legends player, one that like considered the best in the world. His name's Faker. He has a real name, but because they're nerds, everyone just uses everyone's online handles when they talk about him in news stories. So here's his quote. He barely does interviews as well, so it was a weird. He says, "I think that sports is, at its base, something that people engage in for entertainment. If we think about what sports is, it can be boiled down to activities that are fun for people, and esports is just a new age version. Traditional sports use a lot of physical attributes, but the new sports are centered around the brain. Of course, sports like these existed in the past as well as examples as chess, or Go, I'm not sure what Go is, but chess. But the two of them were never really acknowledged as sport until recently. I think it's very hard to enjoy them as a group. With the advancement of technology, now people can enjoy games such as chess as a large group. Likewise, newer games like League of Legends have used technology to entice competition and viewership that is entertained by games. That's how esports became sports." So this had me go several directions. I was like, I read this morning, and I was like, oh, that's weird. I didn't actually think chess was considered a sport. So I was Googling it, because I knew that for years now, chess had been trying, the big chess fans, there's a group, I found forums of huge chess nerds online. It was crazy. It was a whole different world I went into this morning. But all these people like been trying to get chess onto the Olympics for years and years and years. And they were trying to get chess in this year as well. And then I found a thread that was the craziest thing to me. It is literally like all the threads I see about people arguing about if esports are sports. Oh, you know, all they do is click mouse, blah, 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 blah. It can't be a sport. I found one of those threads, but about chess. It was like an alternative rally. They're like, chess can't be a sport because all you do is use your brain, blah, blah, blah. There's no physical attributes, blah, blah, blah. And then someone else is like, oh, chess is a sport because it's competitive as all hell. It's more competitive than some actual physical sports, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. Because as far as I can see, there's two respected sports, what you can actually call sports. Regular sports, like we was talking about AFL, all that sort of stuff, I suppose, soccer, rugby, whatever else you want to put in there. And then the other accepted term that is allowed to use the word sport in their title is extreme sports. Skateboarding, BMXing, all that kind of jazz.
Base jumping.
Trick jumping. So you got your X Games type sports. No one ever blinks an eye when they took the name, however many years ago, the late 80s, early 90s or something like that, when they kind of just started that whole thing. And they were like, we are extreme sports. And the normal sports fans went like, hey, no, wait, you guys are pretty extreme, aren't you? No, I'll let you have that. Extreme sports, go for it, use that. And then however many, mid-2000s, early 2000s, whatever, when esports started up, they're like, hey, extreme sports are sports. We're electronic. Esports, that'll work. And everyone's like, no, don't you try and talk down upon us.
Yeah.
And then I found this whole different world where chess players, apparently for nearly 10 years now, from what I can tell, have been trying to get chess accepted as a sport. So the question is, do you think everyone getting worried about getting hung up on the term sport, and that word particularly, just sport, do you think that's kind of holding back these other mediums getting accepted, because they do have fan bases? Like, people actually watch people play chess. Obviously, people watch esports. People getting hung up over this one word should just get over it and get on with life. Like,
yeah, probably. Yeah, you're probably right. Like, they probably should, because you're right. It's holding back. I mean, there's so many different, and there's things like darts. Like, darts are considered like a competitive
sport. Yeah.
And it's sort of like,
Pull a hammy.
They literally like drink beer while they're doing, and like the darts tournament is like massive. Like they've got like a huge following, that kind of thing. So yeah, probably. And it's one of those things. We've spoken about it before. In regards to like video games and stuff like that, is that eventually the people who are against it, they're all going to be dead. And as in they'll get old and they'll die, and then our generation will be the old people, and we'll be like, esports are a sport, and it'll be accepted like extreme sports are, like rock and roll was, like television was, like video games are sort of getting to that stage now where it's ubiquitous with culture and life and whatnot.
Because the other thing I was gonna, so Magic the Gathering, card game,
MTG.
Yeah.
MTG. That's the one, Jono. You know it.
Yeah.
I know it well.
That draws in online up to times of 25k to 30k viewers at a time.
Yeah.
And this is watching two dudes sit at a table, shuffle decks, and pretend to fight each other with monsters. Right. I'm not trying to call it a sport.
Yeah.
But
we should. Yeah. It's a hard thing because you've got to have definitions. Have got to mean something, right? So, like, I don't think it's a sport. I think it's a game, right? It's a competitive game, and you could probably say the same thing for esports. It's competitive. It's a competitive game. You can even say the same thing for chess. Like, I don't know, like how I feel.
It's getting tricky.
Yeah, it does. It gets tricky. The deeper you go, because then you could be like, I don't know.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, like where do you draw the line? Is everything a sport? Is this a sport that we're doing? Like, we're competing against other podcasts and stuff. Like, is this a sport? Like, I don't think so.
This is what I mean. I think it's your like definition of what makes a sport. I think the definition of what made a sport was very cut in stone years ago as to what it could be, and over time, I think that the definition, like I just read out from the Faker interview, like, is it something that is it competitive? Is it between teams and players in which they have to be very good at, or like practice? Do they put time and effort into it? And the most important question for me about a sport is, or whatever you want to call it, is like, does it have the viewership? Because that's what it comes down to. Like, you can call anything a sport, but if no one wants to watch it, then get out of town. Like, there's no, that's the main factor.
I think you can probably cut them into a couple of categories. You've got because you've got wrestling, right? But wrestling calls itself, like WWE wrestling I'm talking about, they call themselves sports entertainment. So they don't actually consider themselves a sport. It's sports entertainment. So is then, is esports like gaming entertainment or competitive? Like, it's just a hard thing. Like, it's just such a hard thing to sort of define. Like, is it, so like for something like Magic the Gathering, like, is it, it's sport, but it's not a sport. Do you know what I mean? Because
to clarify as well, no one from Wizards or Hasbro has been trying to, as far as I've seen, like, call Magic a sport. But anytime I watch Magic on Twitch, I'm like, look at the numbers of this thing. Like, I know, like, I'm not trying to, it's a really weird time we're living in, and I find it so interesting how people get so hung up on the word sport, like it's that mentality, like you own something, or like it offends them or something in some weird way. Like,
yeah, it's weird because when you were like, Magic the Gathering is a sport, I started to get a bit like twitching a little bit. I'm like, nah. What do you reckon, Jono?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you do have to have definitions, but it's such a wide bracket of like, even if you include actual sports that are accepted as sports, it's still kind of neither here nor there. I think, like, what makes greyhound racing a sport, because that's always in the sports section of the newspaper, and what makes Formula One a sport? It's driving cars. So I've got a friend, Matt Neal, down in Warrnambool, a former podcaster that I used to work with, and he's got a very strict definition of what he considers sport, and I thought it might be interesting to share that with you guys. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I wanted to get your thoughts. I hit him up this morning just to get it in writing, and his definition is a physical competition with a quantifiable outcome, i.e., cannot be based on qualitative judging. So that immediately rules out things like taekwondo, diving, surfing, and then also motorsport is not a sport that's competitive. Mechanics, wrestling, boxing, etc. are socially condoned violence and therefore not a sport. Animal racing is not a sport either, but a form of cruelty.
Jesus.
So, what are your thoughts on
I
a
can agree
definition
with the
like
last
that?
part.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of greyhound racing, mainly, and not so much horse racing. Greyhound racing, because there's quite a lot of really sinister stuff that sort of happens in the background there. And not
We heard about last year particularly.
Yeah, and not to throw all greyhound owners and trainers into the same bracket, because there's a lot of good ones out there. Like my uncle owns and owns racing greyhounds and then like has them as pets and that kind of thing. Treats them really well and they're trained really well and the majority are, but unfortunately it's like anything, the small minority ruin it for the majority and that kind of thing. So I think ACT just last week banned greyhound racing. Anyway, we're getting off topic. It's interesting, isn't it? That sort of definition ruled out like pretty much. Like, can you list all the sports that it just ruled? So ruled out taekwondo, diving, boxing, martial arts.
He ruled out a lot of Olympic games.
Yeah,
stuff, like
all
gymnastics, type
motorsports
based and stuff like that as well.
Motorsports as well.
It would. Yeah, motorsports. It would rule out like all the X Games where it's someone
it's
judging
voting,
something.
Yeah, anything that has someone hold up a card that says like 7.8 or something like that on it is gone.
Yeah. So, I don't agree with that at all. Really, that sort of statement. Just because there's a few things in there that I do think are sports, like the whole thing about the violence thing, like condoned violence. Like, okay, you can say that about hockey. You know what I mean? Like ice hockey. So anyway, I guess it's such a hard thing because everyone's got their own definition. Everyone's got their own interpretation. My definition, when I think of sport, I define it as a competitive activity or a competitive contest with a physical aspect to it. So driving a Formula One car is a really physically strenuous activity.
It takes dexterity and coordination.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes endurance. Like you're in a tiny little car for hours. Like you've got to be fit to do that. You couldn't do that if you're like overweight and don't have good cardio. Like these guys train. I consider obviously martial arts a sport. Those kinds of things. That's why sort of with esports and that, I'm a little bit more inclined to be like, yeah, okay, they are sports because it's a competitive activity and there is a physical exertion to it, and you've got to have. So like that's why like chess, I don't really classify as a sport. That to me is more of a game because it's it's slow, it's methodical, it's
completely mental.
Not real.
Chess definitely has no physical
exertion
at all compared to like high paced esports games.
Like I watch esports and I see these guys and they're like sweating profusely by the end of it. Like you have to have some kind of, and some of them are pudgy little dudes, but you have to have some kind of dexterity in your hands to be able to compete at a high level in esports. So that's why I'm sort of a little bit more forgiving of that. But yeah, so that would be my definition.
The fact that they peak at my microphone just peaked as I said the word peak. The fact that they peak at the age of 23 or something does suggest that there is a physical component that matters significantly. Yeah,
no doubt.
Yeah, I don't know. This is he does that sports podcast, right? He does one himself.
Who's
or
he?
Is that someone else? Who was it? Matt? Was it? That we're reading
No. We used to do Super Terrific Happy Hour together. So he's a movie reviewer and he's another author.
Okay, it's he wrote that book. Okay, yeah, I knew I'd recognize the name from somewhere. It's interesting though that everyone has these separate definitions. To me, obviously it's not like a big normal sports fan. I can just separate them into 3 categories, like all your normal sports and everything, gymnastics, anything that's basically built around like real heavy physical activity where you're running around or something like that. I just chuck into like a normal sports category. Esports is its own category to me, and then something like chess or something like Magic the Gathering, if you wanted to start calling that a sport, is in like a 3rd separate category that I don't know what to call. But I'll put chess and Magic or something like that. If they want to do competitive chess and something like that, that's in like a 3rd separate category to me. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no reason to not try and make rooms for competitive events and stuff built around stuff that people want to watch. Like if there's a market for it, then as far as I'm concerned, then there's nothing wrong with people trying to view it. Also, as a side note,
sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a second ago, as we're literally in the middle of talking about all this, I saw a thing pop up that that Screenplay are gonna be hosting, or whatever you want to call it, like 2 esports teams in Australia. They're going to be like running 2 competitions. They haven't said what games for, but they're going to be running 2 local scene esports competitions, and it's going to be run all through that new TV show. So it's funny how that news story just went up as we're recording. But yep.
Breaking news.
Very good. Because we're on the forefront here at Grandstand Guru.
I was going to say, I like the word that you used, Jack. I don't know if it's commonly used, but competitive gaming, because that, for me, that would include things like chess, poker, which has a huge following.
Poker.
Magic the Gathering.
I was thinking about poker before.
People watch that like crazy too. Like,
yeah. See, I don't see. That's not a sport to me. That's a game.
It's not a sport to me either.
Yeah.
I would put poker in the same category as chess and Magic.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, I would as well. Yeah.
But they'll still play it on ESPN.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think all in all, I don't care about the categories. I don't care about the names. I obviously have my own definitions. I don't think anyone's ever going to agree on all the definitions, but I think everyone should stop snapping at each other's throats trying to tell other people that the thing that they enjoy or the thing they enjoy watching is less insignificant than something else.
Yeah. I concur. Be good to each other, for God's sake.
Yeah.
It's good to talk about because we're, as just mentioned, we're going to be getting a lot more of this stuff happening in Australia.
Well, we spoke about it on this show earlier in a few episodes. Well, one I think it was first, second episode that the AFL is actually bringing in an esports league or looking at investing in an esports league. So it'd be very interesting to see how the sort of proliferation of that over the next few years goes in this country for sure.
Yep.
Jono, what you got?
Hello. Show me what you got. My topic for the week is inspired by the State of Origin last week. The rugby, is it league? Tell me it's rugby league.
Mm-hmm.
It is, yeah?
It is,
I didn't want to say league if it was union or whatever.
It's league,
obviously, I don't follow it, but
yeah.
I was struck by how seriously people take it. Yes. I was struck in the face like a wet fish by how seriously people take it. Because I'm thinking the comparisons that I can make is that the AFL State of Origin has died off completely. I guess you can go into reasons why when we get to you, Jack. And the closest thing that we have overseas, I guess, is rather than players representing the area that they were born, is just geographical and divisional divides. For, say, the NBA All-Star Game, it's the Eastern Conference versus the Western Conference. Same with Major League Baseball, and I believe the NFL has the Pro Bowl. But each of these competitions has a lack of meaning behind it. It seems that the players don't take it seriously. It seems that the fans, they certainly don't have any rivalry by comparison to how the NRL teams do. So, for example, I was talking to my friend at work, Greg, who was saying that in rugby league, players will avoid getting hurt or too tired in the regular season because
they want to play
State of Origin. Because State of Origin's the priority, whereas in the NBA, which is the sport that I follow most closely, players will sit out of the All-Star Game and use that as a break in the middle of the season to rest up and prepare for the the last kind of month or so of the regular season. And in the NFL, the Pro Bowl, I was talking to Nick Pryor before this, and he was saying that it's just like a week before the Super Bowl to kind of tie out that gap there between the semifinals and the Super Bowl, and that if you're playing in the Super Bowl, you're obviously not going to be playing in the Pro Bowl. So immediately you've taken away players from the best two teams, and his opinion seemed to be that it was also a meaningless game, and that people didn't really prioritize it. Now, in Major League Baseball, in 2002, I believe, they introduced a rule where the winner of the All-Star game would actually, being East versus West or whatever the divisional difference was, they would get home ground advantage in the finals, just to give it an actual purpose beyond exhibition game.
Yeah.
I got the quote at the time from the league commissioner was that it was not and should not be a meaningless exhibition game. Last year, I believe they've taken that rule away, so it's gone back to, I suppose, in his words, being a meaningless exhibition game, because people thought it was silly to have something as significant as home ground advantage dictated by this game that a lot of people don't care about. So I want to know what you think about why this change has happened over the years, because certainly in the 80s and 90s and previous eras, it seemed that teams were a lot more competitive and a lot more territorial, and there was rivalries in those kind of different divisions that don't exist anymore. And I'm sure you can certainly speak to that in terms of how it's died out in the AFL, but also maybe why it still exists in rugby.
So, as far as the AFL goes, and I can imagine it would be quite similar across all of the codes where it's sort of died out, is money. And not so much that there's no money in Origin, because there is, but there's more money in the players playing. And the players playing can't afford to get injured in the Origin games, because it would happen, like players would get significant. It's same with international rules. So in the AFL, we play international rules where we play like a hybrid Gaelic football match against like the best. So we have like our all Australian team basically goes and plays the All Ireland team. They'll come over here and we'll play tests, and players would go, and it used to be one of the great sort of spectacles of the year is that all the best players from our code would go and play against all the best players from Ireland, and it would be physical and hard and tough, and it was great. It was a great spectacle to watch, and people would get hurt, and it would cost teams good players, because these were sending the best 30 odd players over to Ireland, or they'd play the tests here or whatever. And same thing with Origin is that they would go so hard and the players were so passionate about it that they would get hurt and it would cost them. And back in the day when when State of Origin and Aussie rules was something that was to behold, and it was every year, and it's something we look forward to like they do in the NRL, it was the players would yearn for that, because
it's a badge of honour. Yeah, it
was a badge of honour. They did make extra dollars from it, and up until the mid-90s, the vast majority of AFL players still worked full-time jobs on the side. AFL has only become a full-time sport in the last 20 years, like a full-on full-time sport, where players are able to sustain their lives off, just playing football. It wasn't until I remember in the early 90s and that, they do the interviews with players at halftime of the game on a Saturday or whatever, and they talk about their landscaping job that they do on the side, or they work in an office, Monday to Friday and go to training 2 days a week and that kind of thing. And it was, there was no, you could go and play Origin because, if you got hurt, you still got your full-time job. So yeah, obviously you'd miss out on match payments and that kind of thing, but you would still be able to go and work at the factory, work in the, unless you've broken your leg or something like that, but you would still generally be able to earn a keep. And it was less sort of, obviously as well, there was a different generation. They were a lot sort of more, I don't want to say harder, but they probably were. That took, they would bust a kneecap and still rock up to work the next day, whereas you do that nowadays and you're in rehab for 6 months and that kind of thing, which is probably the better way to do it, so you don't walk around with a limp for the rest of your life.
But
and
getting
so
hurt
ultimately
back then, you would end up if you get hurt now, you still get paid. So that can't be the reason that the players aren't interested.
No, well that's the thing. It's not that you get paid less now. It's also
right.
So players get their contract and they get match payments and that kind of thing. A lot of players have things written into their contracts where they have clauses to get extra years. So if they get hurt, and they might have a 3-year contract with an option for a fourth. So if they get hurt and they don't play their quota of games, they don't get that 4th year. It doesn't trigger in their contract. So there's that. It's also a risk for the clubs to allow their best players to go and play in these games, because if they get injured, you lose your best player playing in a game, not even playing for your club, and you lose him for an entire year. That can throw a whole season out the window. So there's a myriad of reasons, but those are sort of the big ones for mine, and it's come back in different forms. We had a game, 2008, I believe it was. We had the Allies versus the Vics, which was a great spectacle, which was a great game. I personally love Origin. I love international rules. I love it when the best of the best get together and put on a spectacle of a match. It's fantastic, and I get though why they don't do it, because again, if we have Origin and Marcus Bontempelli does a knee playing for Victoria and instead of playing for the Bulldogs, I'm going to be angry and I'm going to be upset. And at the end of the day, the clubs have got a responsibility to their members, and to their to their stakeholders that they protect their players and put the best team out on the park. So that's and they don't allow sort of that thing to happen. And to be honest, a lot of players don't want to play Origin as well. That is a big thing. A big part of it in the AFL is that we have a long season. We have a 23-week season, then a break, plus 4 weeks of finals, plus preseason. It is a long, like over half a year of football that the season is, plus preseason and that. So the AFL Players Association doesn't actually allow them to play too many sort of things. So
why is it still such a big thing in rugby, and why is it even bigger than the league itself?
Honestly,
with players and fans.
It's a great phenomenon, and it's something that I'll flick it on when when Origin's on. I think it's a really it's a special sort of event in sport every year, like nothing else. It's I honestly have no idea. I couldn't tell you why. I think it's just because it means more to them, and our Origin's always been a bit, in AFL, you weren't always playing against AFL players. So for a lot of the time, it'd be, Victoria would play South Australia, and you weren't playing against players that played for the Adelaide Crows, because the Adelaide Crows didn't exist until the 90s. So you'd be playing against, people from the Sample and people from the Waffle, and it wasn't household names that were coming over and playing in Victoria. Back then, it was more for the players than it was for the people watching. So I think being with rugby, it's probably got something to do with the fact that it's Queensland versus New South Wales, and those are the states that have always been in the NRL. So there's always players in the NRL playing. It's probably the reason it's been able to hang on for as long as it has, and is still as important. But they do love their Origin.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of South Australian players in the VFL at that point, though.
Definitely.
Like Steve Kernigan and John Platten would come over and play for South Australia and guys like that.
Yeah, but the vast majority were still with Sample players and with Waffle players and that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it is a cultural change where obviously the money's come into it across the world, but yeah, I do wonder if it's a changing attitude in like a generational thing, because man, it used to be so competitive.
Definitely,
in the 90s and that kind of thing, and at the moment, like in the NBA, getting like players, like especially young players, really bust themselves to get selected as all-stars, because it means a lot to them for the recognition. Some of them even get like if you get named to an all-star game, you might have a bump in your salary because of what it means as status. And often when it comes to Hall of Fame selection, they'll look at how many All-Star games you made. Even though the starting teams are selected by the fans, it still holds a lot of weight. But when they get time to play the game, it's played like an exhibition game. There's no defense. Teams don't really seem to care whether or not they win or lose. They're trying to do crazy alley-oops and highlights and, taking people off the dribble and just trying to put on a show for people. And that's always been an element of it, but there's definitely no okay, we're going to win this for our conference. And it could be also because people change teams so much that there's not a continuity of the same guys going up against the same guys.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It's bruise-free sport, they don't sort of put the body on the line, that kind of thing, because they don't want to screw themselves out of the regular season. Yeah, it's all part of it. But having said all of that, AFL is looking at doing a hybrid version of AFL called AFLX over the sort of. I think they're looking at doing it in between the bye round, in between round 23 and when the first round of the finals start this year. So
is Vince McMahon involved?
I wouldn't be surprised. It's like a
sounds like XFL.
Yeah, it's like they play it on like a small rectangle ground. There's no ball ups. It's like 10-a-side or something like that. It's supposed to be like quick, fast paced, like kind of like your
2020.
Like it's like the 2020 version of football, like your fast fours, tennis, or whatever it is. So, it should be very interesting. So, and apparently,
what's the point of all these events? Is it just because like viewers are wanting more matches and they can't get enough? That's basically what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, it's a big part of it. It's a traditional thing as well.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a territorial kind of thing, especially for the NRL and what it used to be more so with the AFL as well. That it was a real tribal kind of battle between the states.
So if the AFL did what you're talking, this X thing, like what's the point of it? It's just
it'll be.
Is it?
It's just the money for the AFL. It's
money.
money.
It is just the money.
Making.
Okay, I'm just to clarify.
Yeah.
It's just so why would anyone want to participate? That's what I'm trying to understand. Like, why would players want to participate? Like, what do they get out of it?
Money.
It's just money.
They'll get a paid packet, an extra. Sort of
would the money is the money high enough to the point where they risk hurting themselves for that? That's the thing I'm getting. I'm like, so if the money isn't high enough, you're not going to risk it to miss out on the like that.
They'll make it worth their while, and that it'll be similar to what Jono was saying, is that they'll play bruise-free football. There'll be no this hybrid sort of. There'll be no players going in and going hard at it and trying to hurt each other. It'll be very airy, not airy-fairy, but
if they're
focused on offense more than the defense. Yeah.
But doesn't that make it more boring for the viewers?
No, we want. I mean, no, it would actually probably make it more entertaining because it's high score. I mean, it depends what you're into. If you like the hard, physical sort of crash and bash type footy, then you're probably not going to enjoy it as much. But one of the big challenges of the game today is that it's not as attacking as it used to be. There's less goals kicked, so a high speed, high attacking, less sort of congested game is probably something that fans are going to really enjoy.
So if they're just looking for a way to like put more matches out to make more money and into like stuff like that, why instead of grabbing players from already like involved in campaigns or whatever you want to call it, current season stuff, why don't they do like completely different league stuff involving players who aren't involved? Like, why isn't that an option? Why does it have to be players who are already involved in teams?
They do. So we have
people want to see the names they recognize.
Yeah, they want to see the best of the best going at it. So you're not going to get. And we do. Like, we have, like, just 2 weeks ago we had we had Victoria versus Western Australia in the VFL, so like the lower league. So like the twos basically. They had their state of origin, which was the best from the Victoria, seconds, and the best from Western Australian League, and they came and they played their origin, and it's covered and it's on TV, but no, it doesn't have the viewership because people want to watch the best of the best go at it.
Because listening to all that, it just sounds like typical AFL or typical like sporting fan mentality to be like, yes, I really want my favourite player to play in this side thing, and then just screaming at your TV like, yeah, and then the moment he hurts himself, it's like, you idiot, like, why the hell did you...
Pretty much. That's pretty much exactly how it goes, yeah. Very good. Very good.
That's it. You summed it up.
Awesome. Jono, what are you looking forward to this weekend?
Ooh. Well, today we had the NBA awards, and just to follow up from last week, we had Russell Westbrook did indeed win the MVP. So pretty significant historic thing there. But there's not really anything apart from free agency that I'm looking forward to in the NBA, because I don't care about any other sports, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Dylan, is there anything
I'm looking forward to
see?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I'm looking forward to see how the Bulls try and salvage some of these terrible moves they're making in the front office.
No doubt.
Yeah,
no doubt.
That's me. Dylan.
Dylan, is there anything that you're looking forward to, or anything that you've come across that you thought, hey, that looks like something I could wrap my chops around?
There's nothing really coming up this week. That's all that I think the biggest thing the biggest thing happening this week in the world of electronic sporting events is Heroes of the Storm, which is that MOBA that Blizzard made, which I don't really care about. So
Solid.
MOBAs. Nerds.
Bloody MOBA nerds. Mine's pretty standard. There's not really much else going on in the sporting world, so I'm looking forward to seeing how the Doggies back it up against the Eagles. They're coming off a pretty demoralising loss against the Demons at home. So the Eagles will come over here, who don't traditionally play well in Melbourne over the last few years. So it'll be good to see how we back up the win against the Eagles, because they're an interesting outfit, but they do have a lot of players out, so that'll be very good.
Oh, actually, I just
no, you had your chance.
The Korean League of Legends Champion Series has actually just started tonight, which is always the most interesting of League of Legends streams to watch, because the commentators they have on there are way more enthusiastic than the American counterparts. And the American counterparts commentators can get pretty loud, but listening to someone yell into a microphone and you can't understand what they're saying anyway, but you can tell they're very enthused or very excited. That's probably the best way to listen to commentary as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, brilliant. And I just want to give a quick shout out to our boy Tom Marshall. He was very enthused that the Lions drew today. So the All Blacks got the win for him on the weekend, and he went again tonight. And I think it was the Hurricanes that he said it was, who the Wellington team. They they drew with the Lions, the British Lions. So shout out to you, Tommy, old boy.
Whatever that means.
Ladies
New Zealand sports.
Rugby, eh? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you so much for joining us again for another episode of Grandstand Gurus. This is a product of the Explosion Network. You can find all of our content over at www.explosionnetwork.com. We've got Platinum Explosion, the #1 PlayStation podcast in the Oceanias. We have the original Pleasure Explosion. We have Viewing Gods. Last episode goes live this week, so check that out. Just coming up soon, we will have another review show for a very
south of King's Landing.
South of King's Landing. So we're going live with that. You heard it here first. South of King's Landing, the official Explosion Network Game of Thrones review show. So stay tuned for that on YouTube, bit.ly/Explosion Network. Please like, subscribe, share us with your friends and with your mother. You can follow us all on Twitter. Jono is at Jono himself. Dylan is at Viva La Dill, and I am at Kruse_mate. Until next time, plat plat, keep on grandstanding.
Balls!